So, hello everyone. Welcome. There's still people coming in, but for those of you who've already joined us, welcome to this Global Investigative Journalism Network webinar on investigating the pandemic. I'm going to say welcome again to everyone joining because I can see numbers coming in at the moment, and it's great having people from all over the world joining us for this sixth GIJN webinar on investigating COVID-19. And thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. Today, the one that we're doing today, the webinar today, is about using open source information to report from home. Journalists play a very critical role in this pandemic, but reporting on the ground and doing face-to-face interviews is very high risk for a range of reasons, least of all medical. And today we're going to focus on ways that you can continue to investigate using basically a number of techniques, your laptop and your wit. And these techniques, of course, are very useful not only during the time of the pandemic, very helpful techniques in social media and using smartphones and so on, but they are of particular relevance at the moment. I want to welcome you. My name is Anne Koch, and I'm the Program Director for the Global Investigative Journalism Network, and I am your moderator today. So welcome to everyone joining us. Just a little bit about GIJN, Global Investigative Journalism Network, for those of you who aren't familiar with us. It's the largest global network of nonprofit investigative journalism organizations in the world. And at the moment, we have 187 member organizations in 78 countries. But we work with journalists everywhere. We work with journalists in nonprofit and commercial, freelance, and so on. And we work to connect and support them. So check out our website, gijn.org, and we've got newsletters you can sign up to, social media in multiple languages, and so on. Again, to those joining us now, welcome to this sixth GIJN webinar, focusing today on using open source information for reporting from home. I'm delighted today, as you can see, that we've got three really great, experienced investigators for the next hour and a quarter or so. And they're going to share their insights on certain tips and techniques on how to report, that you can use to report on COVID-19. We're emphasizing, really focusing on practical tips and techniques. And I'd like to introduce the speakers now. The first speaker will be journalist Sean Nicholls, who works with a team at the Four Corners Investigative Journalism television program at the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. And today Sean will explain how he and his team produced a really fantastic documentary from Wuhan in China using amateur video from smartphones. And I think we'll put the link to his fantastic investigation in the chat box. The second up is Charlotte Godart from Bellingcat. She is an investigator and a trainer at Bellingcat, an organization I don't think needs too much introduction to this audience. She'll focus on how to use social media for investigation, in particular focus on Twitter. We're also very pleased to be joined by Gisela Pérez de Acha Chavez from the Investigations Lab at the University of California, Berkeley's Human Rights Center. And they do really remarkable investigation on human rights. Gisela will focus also on social media, but on Facebook this time. And I particularly want to thank her for being up at absolutely the crack of dawn in California. So I appreciate that. And also to Sean, who is in Australia, where he would rather probably be going to bed now, where it's extremely late, and also from Amsterdam. Thank you, Charlotte. So that's great that we could get such a global group together to talk about this. A few logistics just quickly before we start. The webinar will last about 75 minutes. These topics, we could go for a week with them, but I think this will give people a good taster for sure. And we will distribute all the material and the slide material that is used in this webinar later. So you don't have to take rapid notes. Each speaker will talk for about 10 minutes and then we'll take questions, and you can send the questions into the Q&A box, please. I know people tend to use the chat box, but we're trying to encourage people to use the Q&A box. And when we, at the end, when we have when the speakers are finished, my colleague Eunice Au will come up and moderate the questions. So thanks to Eunice for doing that. I'd like finally to let everyone know that we are recording this webinar, and we'll send you a link later, etc. But we're putting it, it's going on our YouTube channel, and it's also going out on Facebook. So without further ado, Sean Nicholls from ABC, please start.
Thanks, and thanks very much. And welcome everybody. I might just start with a little bit of context about the program I work for. Four Corners is the flagship current affairs program, television program on the Australian national broadcaster. And so every week we produce a 45-minute public affairs program. And so in late January, like the rest of the world, we really started waking up to what was happening in Wuhan, China, and wanted to cover, we decided very quickly we wanted to cover what was clearly an extraordinary unfolding event. And as it happened, we just finished a film, another documentary on the Australian wildfires that tore down the East Coast in that same month. And we had used a lot of user-generated video in that documentary. So we started thinking, well, we can't get into China at the moment. And even if we could, it looks like it's, you know, you've got to remember, nobody really knew what was going on with the virus at that point, categorically. So we were thinking, can we apply some of these same techniques to covering the emerging virus in Wuhan? And so that's where we started, really. Because what was emerging, and I'm sure a lot of you saw this, was some pretty astonishing vision coming out, just little bits of it coming out in social media, shot by Wuhan citizens who suddenly found themselves in the middle of this, you know, incredibly fast-moving story, and it would have been obviously incredibly terrifying for them. And as the Hubei province authorities made the decision to lock down the whole province of 60 million people from the rest of the world, this was really the only vision that was providing a portal, a real portal that could be trusted, I guess, into what was happening. So we immediately started to try and work out how to find and use this vision to make our documentary. And, you know, particularly hard in a country that you can't get into about unfolding events that their government was very hard, you know, very, very much trying to suppress. So we started sourcing the user-generated vision that was coming out from inside Wuhan and Hubei province. And the first challenge, of course, was to tap into the networks of bloggers and netizens who had started posting this initial vision, these initial snippets. And even then, it was rapidly being taken down by the Chinese censors. So for us, the first challenge was really finding the vision. And we were lucky to have on our team a native Chinese language speaker who could also read the language. And also we had on our staff a bit of an expert in hunting down this type of content from closed and open digital networks. He'd done quite a bit of this work around the world previously. So some of this material was surfacing after having been reposted from sources inside China on networks such as Weibo and WeChat. And so the first step was trying to identify really who were the key players, who were the people doing this. So we tried to find bloggers in Hong Kong and China who were reposting this material. And I guess we tried to work backwards from there to try and work out where they were getting it from. And this led us to a YouTube channel where a group of Chinese citizens who were blogging this stuff were using VPNs to collate and archive vision out of Wuhan as it happened and elsewhere in China, because this was spreading across the country at the time, before it was being deleted by the Chinese censors. And, you know, this was this extraordinary vision that we were seeing about overwhelmed hospitals, angry people, angry Chinese citizens, you know, having a go at their government. And, you know, very dangerous thing to do at any time, but in particular, dangerous in the middle of a health crisis. And extraordinary vision of what methods that authorities were taking to try and contain the virus, like welding shut the doors of apartment buildings. So once we'd started gathering and accessing some of this material, the next step obviously was probably one of the most important steps, which was verifying it. Asking the questions like, was it taken where it's purported to have been taken? You know, if it's vision inside the hospital, is it inside the hospital it claims to be from? And even if it is the right hospital, was this scene taking place when it's claimed? So to do that, we started looking at physical and time verification. So for example, for vision inside hospitals, we were able to match the type of flooring or the unique aspects of the walls or door frames with an earlier separate video that had been posted of a Wuhan hospital, ironically by a pro-government blogger sometime earlier, but that gave us the reference point to be able to say, yes, well, that, you know, confirms that this is the hospital that we are looking at. We also used reverse image searches using freeze frames from the videos that we'd sourced. And we used Baidu, which is, as most of you probably know, the Chinese version of Google Street View. And this was particularly useful for contextualizing the time that a video was taken, because of course, that might bear no relation at all to the time that it was posted. And so the great thing about Baidu is that it date stamps when one of its street shots was taken as it goes about mapping cities in China. So we were able in some cases to use Baidu to compare vision purporting to be coming out of Wuhan during the crisis to shore that up. And one example that, you know, I'll tell you about is there was a streetscape that featured a poster on a wall on one corner. And when we looked at that location on Baidu, that poster was almost brand new. But in the vision we were investigating, it had become faded and a little bit ragged around the edges. So that told us that the vision that we were looking at came from after that date, which happened to be in December, just as the virus really began to take hold. So it gave us a time frame that we could be confident in. We also used our own talent on the ground. We made good use of vision shot by a couple of Australians who had found themselves trapped in Wuhan and Hubei province during the lockdown and were desperately trying to get out. And we asked one of them, a bloke called Tim McLean, to do as much filming around the town that he was living in, which was on the outskirts of Wuhan, as much filming as he possibly could. And luckily for us, Tim was a bit of a gold mine. He'd been living in the district for quite a while with his Chinese fiancée, so he really knew the streets already, and he went out almost daily for us, filming the street life, or in this case, the lack of street life. And so we got some vision using that technique that we ordinarily wouldn't have had access to, which was extremely valuable in using that to weave through the narrative of our film. And for example, Tim lived in an apartment block opposite a major hospital. And so there's vision we used in the film of bodies actually being wheeled out into the street on stretchers that he just happened to have shot, you know, for us. Because he was, you know, at a great location. He also filmed as local authorities disinfected the gutters outside his apartment block. So this really sort of personal, close stuff that might have been very difficult, if not impossible, to find otherwise. I mean, one definite advantage of using a non-national we found was that while he retained a very healthy respect for the Chinese government, he was probably bolder in his filming than many locals might have been. And we discovered that pretty quickly when he was out filming one day for us and got stopped by the police. He was hauled in and questioned for an hour about what he was doing, and the police also pulled in his fiancée, as I said, a Chinese national, for questioning after that. And so that, you know, was a real reminder. They were released without charge, but it was a real reminder for us of the dangers of enlisting people to film for you. It's so easy to get caught up in chasing the vision that you forget about the welfare of the people that you are asking to help you. So that was something for us very much to remember for the future. We did have to give him, you know, some direction. I've found doing this, that when you ask people to film for you for a program such as ours, we rely on sort of, you know, nice long sweeping shots, but people tend to have the inclination just to film in very short bursts. I don't know why, but most people do it. So one tip would be just remind people that they need to let the shot run for a while, and it makes it a whole, like in television anyway, it makes it a whole lot easier to edit properly. And for our program, we also had to ask them to shoot, you know, different angles so it didn't all look identical. So that's a more stylistic thing, but pretty important when you're trying to make a compelling documentary. So Tim and another Australian made video diaries for us as well. We tried doing Skype, but the sound and vision was terrible. So we actually used them. We asked them to use their own iPhone to record as we were interviewing them on another phone on speaker. And we found that worked really, it was a little bit complicated, but we found that delivered a fantastic quality of sound and vision that you just wouldn't have got over Skype or WeChat, for example. The only complicating factor was that we had to break up the interviews into about 5-minute segments. Otherwise we would have ended up with this, you know, 20, 25-minute interview chunk, which would have taken probably days to get back to Australia. So it was a little bit bitsy, but it was very, very much worth doing that. We also interviewed a dissident Chinese academic in his home in Beijing, and we could have sent a film crew, but because he was already under the eye of Chinese authorities, that would have attracted attention. So we decided again to use the iPhone, and that worked really well. He was able to speak freely about his criticisms of President Xi of China and how the government, local and central, were handling the crisis. So, and thankfully, again, there were no repercussions for him. And just to wind up, in making our film, we were also fortunate that we could shoot some interviews in Australia in the traditional way. In the conventional way. There was a major research effort underway to find a vaccine in labs here. But you know what, when you ask people what they remember about the film, it's always the stuff that was shot by those people on the ground, the Chinese nationals, and also the people that we engaged, because it was so raw, it was personal, and it was immediate. And that's the point. It really got the truth across, the unvarnished truth that they were trying to get out of the country. And yeah, it was our privilege, I guess, to help them do it.
Thank you for that. And I can definitely tell you that this documentary is worth seeing and totally harrowing. You raise very good questions there, also about how to work safely and effectively with many citizens who are prepared to act as journalists in times like this, and there, or any other times, but also how we, you know, how we need to be careful so working with private citizens who want to investigate. So thank you very much for that. And I'm now going to turn to Charlotte from Bellingcat. Charlotte, over to you.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, Sean, that was incredibly fascinating. Thank you for that. I want to just expand further on some of the things you talked about, and I'll do so with this presentation right now. So let me share. Great. Can everybody see this okay? Yeah, okay. Great. So you did mention at one point towards the beginning of your talk just now that you found a key YouTube channel, and then through that channel you were able to find videos, and that's what ended up being, you know, a turning point for you in your open source investigation. And that's what I want to focus on right now, is how do we go from everything that's on the internet to finding that one YouTube channel, or that, you know, one blogger, or the person that really is making the difference in terms of posting reliable and up-to-date open source content. So I don't think I really need to tell you this, but there's a lot of stuff out there on the internet. 6,000 tweets per second. Just thinking about that number really blows my mind. And 500 hours of content uploaded to YouTube every minute. So, you know, you have to be able to use the internet to your advantage and perform what I like to call smart searches, so that you can cast a wide enough net that you're really getting everything that there is out there on the topic, but also not so wide that you're just inundated with content that absolutely no human could be able to get through. All right, so one tool to do that with is TweetDeck. So like I said, 6,000 tweets per second. What do we do to filter that down? How can we use Twitter to our advantage in an investigation? In my opinion, and from a lot of other researchers I work with, TweetDeck is one of the best tools to do that with. So TweetDeck was developed by somebody outside of Twitter, but then Twitter ended up buying it and repurposing it into Twitter itself. So if you have a Twitter account, you have a TweetDeck regardless of whether or not you've ever used it. And I'll take you through it somewhat quickly. Okay. All right. So to access your TweetDeck, you just go to tweetdeck.com or tweetdeck.twitter.com. Both will lead you there. And this is what it looks like. So these are columns, most of which I've created or added onto here based on specific topics or filters that I want to apply to the whole of Twitter. You could see here, this was for an article I wrote on coronavirus. If I put the capital "and" between the two letters, it's now, or the two words, it's now only giving me tweets that have both corona and all D within them, because I was looking for a video at this grocery store. And you'll see that there's not that many tweets with this specific combination. However, if I look up a word that's more commonly being used, like Venezuela, or even just corona or COVID-19, it's updating constantly. These are hundreds of tweets per minute, if not a lot more than that, coming in all the time. And this is kind of useless to me, essentially, because I barely have the time to read any of these before they switch. And yeah, I mean, for my research, it's just all over the place. People could be tweeting about corona from anywhere. So to take this and filter it down further, you just click on this little button here, and you'll get this list of filters popping up. Some options here are dates. So if you're specifically interested in people talking about corona back in January, you could do that. You can go as far back as 2015. So, or actually, no, sorry, 2010. That's what I thought. 5. Yeah, anyway, you could go back pretty far. I doubt you can go back to 2000, but it looks like that's an option. You can also pick the language. So this is, again, another point that Sean made, was having a local language speaker on his team. It was really important. Some of us don't have that advantage, and we still want that local content. In that case, we need to be searching in the local language. Otherwise, you know, you're getting content from anywhere else. So that's there. Location, I'm going to run you through an example of this in a minute, so I would just tell you to ignore this for now. Tweet authors, so you can say, okay, I want tweets only from people who are verified. In this case, I've looked up corona or COVID only for verified users, and you'll see that it's, you know, politicians, news media, some celebrities, things like that. So if that's something you're interested in, you only want these kinds of sources, you can do that. And then lastly, you can do engagement as well. So I only want tweets that have had at least, I don't know, 200 retweets, for instance. Okay, now you're getting more of the kinds of tweets that have gone viral relating to coronavirus. So that's a really quick run through of what you can do on TweetDeck. Let me take you through doing a location search quickly. All right, so let's say you want everybody tweeting in Manhattan right now, and you're not necessarily interested in what they're saying, but you're just interested in collecting the whole of this location only. For instance, I don't know, a protest breaks out, or a riot breaks out, or there's an election, and people could be tweeting, you know, I'm protesting for this, or a hashtag, or maybe they're tweeting nothing but a video. Regardless, you're not even going to worry about what they're tweeting. You're just going to worry about where they are. So in this case, I pulled up Google Maps because in my opinion, it's the easiest way to get coordinates. But I right click, and then I click on what's here. Oh. Why is it doing that? Okay. And then at the bottom here, I'll have coordinates that I can grab. So I'm just gonna copy those, head back to my TweetDeck. To create a column, I'm gonna click on the magnifying glass up here, and then I'm gonna type this little guy in. So it's geocode, the coordinates. I'm gonna give myself a radius that I wanna search. In this case, I don't know, 2 kilometers, and then hit enter. Okay, so now I've told Twitter, okay, from this location in Manhattan and the 2 kilometers surrounding it, I want all the tweets that are coming in chronological order. I'm sorry if that went fast for you. I am going to mention at the end that I have a guide on Bellingcat about how to do all of this. So just take it in for now and you can read that later. But yeah, so now I have all the content coming in from this area. This is only if people have their location settings turned on and they've allowed Twitter to access those. It used to be opt-out, so you were automatically enrolled and your location was automatically given to them. It's now opt-in, so it's fewer people than it used to be, but still, most people don't really care if Twitter knows where they are or takes in that information, especially because it tends to give them more targeted trending topics or, you know, here's what's happening near you. The cool thing is I can also combine this with a keyword search. So in this case, Corona. And now it's going to give me, you know, people within this area talking about Corona who have those location settings turned on. Okay. Let me go back to my slides. Great. So that's a quick overview of TweetDeck, but I highly recommend you go look at the guide that I have published and take a deep dive into working on it while we all have this time off anyway, or not off, we're all working, but we all can spend a lot of time in front of the computer if we're lucky enough. So yeah, it's a great, wonderful tool to filter out what's going on Twitter. And then finally, the Bellingcat method, this is something that Sean touched on as well. So once you have that content, once you've found that tweet or that YouTube channel or that video, you're then going to want to verify it. And that comes into play with figuring out where it happened using geolocation, when it happened using chronolocation. Sean brought up the great example of geolocating hospitals and then using Baidu and their Street View dates in order to chronolocate exactly when the pictures or videos were taken. And then figuring out exactly what it is you're looking at. So using corroboration to make sure you have the whole picture, that you have videos from several different angles, and a timeline of the event in front of you. All right, so the last thing, because I was told that you all were interested in open source resources, here's just a couple that I would recommend. I'm sending out these slides as a PDF afterwards, so don't frantically try to write any of these links down now. Okay, so this is Bellingcat's online investigation toolkit. We give this out all the time. You can see there's always at least like 50 people on here at any given time, but it's pretty big. It's 24 pages of tools broken down by category. You can see here the different kinds of categories, and we try to keep it updated. So if things are no longer active, we take them down. If a new tool pops up, we put it in there. So yeah, it's a good place to go, especially if you're, you know, let's say you're interested in Snapchat and you don't know what tools out there exist. You can hop in here, search the document for Snapchat, and then go from there. There's also OSINT framework, which looks like this. I really like the design of this site as well. But yeah, so in this case, all right, let's say I'm interested in people search engines, just general. It's going to give me the list of all the ones that it knows exist. So in this case, people, if I click on that, it'll take me to people where I can do a search on someone, etc. The main thing I want to say about this is there are so many of these kinds of websites and toolkits that exist. They're really helpful if you're already in the middle of researching something, let's say TikTok, and you're like, okay, there has to be a tool out there to make this easier to search. You can go to here to look for that. However, if you're really trying to get invested in open source techniques and learning more about them, I wouldn't just pick up a whole list of tools. I think that's a big mistake a lot of people make. They come to workshops or come to these kinds of webinars and they're like, just give me all the tools. It's about a mindset. It's a completely different way of thinking about the internet and about the way you consume content, and it's about practice. So the tools are such a small piece of that. And I would actually recommend that you get involved instead with guides and workshops and books. And some of those that I would recommend, Open Source Intelligence Techniques by Michael Bizel is a really wonderful, thick book. Contains pretty much everything you need to know as of last year about OSINT and all the different kinds of tools and techniques that there exists out there. Oh, this was supposed to be a different link. My apologies. The other book I would recommend is Digital Witness by Alexa Koenig, Sam Dubberly. Give me just a moment. There we go. Oh, dang. Okay, maybe I put the wrong link there. I'll make sure to fix that. It's just called Digital Witness, if I were to look it up. Okay. Great. And this one is wonderful, especially if you're someone who does human rights investigations or anything regarding open source and the law. So yeah, that's another book that you can look into. Bellingcat has a lot of guides out there, including my guide on TweetDeck, which is really long and extensive, and I would recommend that you take a look at if you're interested, but also guides on flight tracking and a lot of other things. And we're also offering now online workshops for these next few weeks while we're all here right now. So if that's something else, if open source techniques is something you really want to get invested in, I would recommend looking at those too. So yeah, not just thinking about tools, but thinking about really sitting down and reading and putting yourself in the mindset of an open source researcher and then becoming one yourself. Yeah, that's all I have.
Great, Charlotte. Thanks very much. Plenty of work to do there. I mean, working your way through all of that, I think will take a very long time. As you advise, maybe it's best to start one step at a time. But great material, yes. And thank you for that. And the particular Twitter deck presentation, very helpful. A number of people in the audience are noticing that your battery is running really low.
Yes,
so
sorry if that's stressing people out. I'm about to plug it in.
It's totally stressing people out. So
I know.
So yeah, like it's stressing me out too, Charlotte.
I know, my charger's right around the corner. I'll plug it in right now, everybody.
Okay, everybody, you can all relax now because we've got the battery problem sorted out. And so Gisela, over to you from Berkeley, and thanks again for getting up in the middle of the night to do this. Welcome.
Yeah, hi everyone. Really good to meet you. My name is Gisela. I am a human rights attorney turned journalist, which is not a very common combination. I work at the Human Rights Investigations lab at UC Berkeley, and what we do essentially is we verify user-generated content in war and conflict zones to document war crimes. It's a complicated process, both legally and journalistically, but it's right there cutting edge of mixing these techniques to keep war criminals and grave human rights violations accountable. So I'm going to be talking about mostly Facebook. And again, we're doing this really kind of like, it's like a bird's eye view. We're doing this fairly quickly. I know Charlotte and I could spend weeks just talking about this at least. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Let's start with the slides. Well, I introduced the Human Rights Center already, based at UC Berkeley School of Law. And I think this is really important to say for me, just at least from the journalistic perspective, open sources only half the job. Like, you still have to work the phone. You still have to, convince your source to go on the record. You still have to figure out what's going on. And like, overall, what I mean by this is online open source and open source information is only a reporting tool, is one more reporting and sourcing tool. So I like keeping this in mind as I go through whatever, Twitter or Facebook. Okay, so I'm going to focus specifically on Facebook, and I call this section Beating the Algorithm. Facebook's algorithm is really finicky and obscure. And it's really hard for researchers to go around it. And I'll show you an example in a sec. It's not like TweetDeck where everything is open. Twitter has more of a, you can customize your timeline to see real time things in real time. And TweetDeck is also an amazing tool to do that. Well, Facebook is, you know, Facebook makes things hard for you. So my example is going to be, I was thinking about like, okay, what could be a good example that I've come across in my research to show the use of open source tools. These tools are to get, my goal is to get the video from the people who are in Syria and are posting it. Because of course, as a journalist, I mean, Mary Colvin was killed in Syria, right? Like it's becoming harder and harder to go in this war and conflict zones. But that doesn't mean that we have to stop reporting on it. It's quite the contrary. So the White Helmets, they're a volunteer organization and that have been working in the Syrian civil war. They usually do medical evacuations, urban search and rescue in response to bombing, evacuation of civilians, and essential service delivery. And they're usually the first respondents at a site. So they usually post really, really valuable material, at least for us. So I'm right now on Facebook. It's my burner Facebook, don't tell Facebook. But it's, you're seeing here, I'm searching for White Helmets, right? Which is, so I got their page, I got a couple other random things, but I want to call your attention to how randomly Facebook's algorithm is just throwing content at me. This is from April 20th. This is 5 hours ago. This is from March 14th. This is from March 22nd. This is from January 10th. I mean, it's just, and each time it's different. Like it's all over the place. I can, you know, like search a little bit here, but really any date, like even if I do 2020, why are they giving me random people posting about the White Helmets? I'm like really confused. I just want to see what happened in this particular city, right? Like, let's say I'm a researcher and I want to see what happened in Idlib. Idlib is this area right here in Syria. It's very close to the Turkish border, and it has been really contested for a long time. You might have probably seen it in the news in the beginning of 2020. There was a really bad refugee crisis, of course, now being accentuated by coronavirus. So what we use, well, one of my favorite tools is who posted what. This is essentially, I know the interface is not the prettiest, but I don't know why open source people, we're not fans of, we're not like big fans of the of design. It's like, I think we're drawn into things without an interface. So this is ran by the community, by Henk van Es, and it can be a little finicky, but it's usually, it works really, really well. So the idea is essentially, we want to get around Facebook's, what I call algorithmic prioritization. All these results that Facebook is showing me are based on what I like and my search history, but they're not neutral. And what I'm looking for as a researcher is to get results that are as neutral as possible, so that in Charlotte's terms, I can cast the net really wide, but it's also like searching a needle in a haystack. So you want to have your bunch of haystack and then you really, really target the needle that you want. This usually requires a lot of pre-research, by the way. If you don't know your keywords, it's going to be really hard. So let's figure out what has happened in Idlib lately, right? So I'm going to go again. I'm going to say White Helmet. This is their official page. I haven't liked it from my burner account. I'm going to copy paste the link here and go to who posted what. And to get, the first step is to get the user ID. And this works with anyone. It could work with, like, we use it a lot to establish accountability and responsibility of war criminals, or soldiers apparently post a lot on Facebook, right? Because they're people as well. So you can get a lot of clues. So I'm going to post it. I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to say find, and it's going to spit out user ID. which I'm guessing it's probably also going to be like this one. Okay. So in this case, it's the same as this one over here. If you can see at the very top, it's being covered. But this is my user ID. So then I'm going to go down here. And again, I can search specific dates, post about my keywords and a certain date, specific month, same as TweetDeck, and a specific year. And it goes back all the way, I think, to 2000, actually, 1999, no, 2004. And a time range you can also search. So say, let's say I want to search for, I want to see what was happening in Idlib from January 1st to, let's say February 29th, right? You can also search the location. I'll talk about that in a little bit. So I'm going to look, so I got my user ID here, right? So I'm going to go down here, posts directly from and posts associated with. I'm going to say first posts from and copy paste the user ID here. And I'm going to search Idlib. So here I'm going around Facebook's algorithms to see what the White Helmets has posted about Idlib. And you'll see how, can you see the difference? Like this is the White Helmets. This is just a random one, right? Like I'm getting actual White Helmets and just whatever Facebook wants me to see. And why would I trust Facebook, right? But over here, I'm getting all the posts from the date that I specified from Idlib. So why this is important is, you know, like they are, the White Helmets are usually the first ones to get to the to a disaster zone or to a place where human rights are being violated, a huge fire in a fuel store in Idlib, right? So this would be like the entry point to my research or my video or whatever I want to do. And then of course you have all these little tabs up here on Facebook where you can go, you know, I only want to see photos or I only want to see videos, right? Dangerous eviction operation in Idlib. Okay, that looks like, I'm not going to open it because I don't know the content that might have, and sometimes these are really gruesome content, but just to give you a really quick idea and an overview. And then lastly, let's say I want to see what's up, and I'm based in Berkeley, right? So I want to see, you can do the same with locations. I want to see what's up in Berkeley with the hashtag coronavirus, right? Like, is anyone uploading stuff? Is anyone going about it? So this is my link. I don't know why it's not opening. This is my link, right? And then I'll go to the who posted what. And let's do location now. The location ID is gonna be, I'm sorry, it's just the, oh, I got it. The location ID is usually going to be right here. So if you see on the hyperlink, you have a number. That number is the ID of the specific location that you're looking for. So right now it's things to do in Berkeley, California, and this is the location. This is how Facebook codifies the location of Berkeley, California. So I'll go back from to who posted what, and I will delete this. And I'll say COVID-19 in Berkeley, location and the user ID location. And it's going to search all the posts, the public posts from everyone who's saying something about COVID. And then you can also change it and say, COVID from the location, let's not do, and it'll pop up. So you can be either you or your friends, it can be public, the only ones that are public. This is especially useful for journalists because you can use it, like if people post it publicly. And just, this will not search for things that posts that are private, obviously. So Facebook is limited in that way, in which TweetDeck is not, because most posts are tend to just be private. I've actually found, I'm working on 2 stories that I've found on Facebook right now, and it's just, you find the lead and then you try to work it from there. So lastly, of course, of more resources, I also have Bellingcat's list of OSINT tools. I do want to say that it's really exciting stuff, and the best way to learn is just launch into it and not be worried about breaking the internet. The internet is not going to break, and there's a lot of tutorials, and there's like a really big OSINT community on Twitter. So I would definitely encourage everyone to go for it. I would particularly like Hunchly for archiving. I wish I had heard about Hunchly before. And I want to give a shout out to Craig Silverman for putting this. He just launched this yesterday, and I was giving it a look yesterday night, and it looks pretty amazing. So definitely check it out on how to verify stuff for disinformation and media manipulation. Because of course, the first step is, yes, filtering through a gazillion things on the internet, but then you really have to verify it and see, is this a fact? Is this true? So Craig's verification handbook has a lot of really cool tips on that. Okay, and I think that's it for my side. Looking forward for all the questions.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Gisela. That's really very interesting. And actually, on Craig Silverman, we'll definitely invite him to GIJN to do a webinar on his new book. And there are other people that were mentioned here that are possible speakers in future related webinars. That was really interesting. I also think, because the list is so long of possible tools that can be used, hearing about 2 of the main ones in a bit more detail was really useful. And the whole thing is quite doable, as you say, 1 step at a time, and just work your way through it. And it's been very helpful. So if anyone has questions, please don't forget to write them into the Q&A box, and we'll hopefully be able to get to you. We've got about 20 minutes or so for questions, and we've had some questions already. So I'm going to ask my colleague Eunice Au to come up, and I think the first couple of questions are for Sean, if I'm not mistaken. Eunice?
Yes, that's right. We have some specific questions directed to specific speakers. So I'll start with Sean. Ridwan Kolawole is asking, sometimes investigative reporting requires some physical environment and ambience of where one is reporting in order to show some evidence for the story. So how is this possible in a situation like the documentary where the journalist conducts an interview via phone or video call? And AJ Ullman asks about the documentary as well. How many people were working on verifying the information, and how much time was used on it? And if we want to squeeze in one more, Judith Raub from Germany is asking about verifying the content. If we want to use information on social media, a picture or video which shows security forces beating up people, or a post which describes such violence, how can I find out if this information is serious?
Yeah, well, I mean, the answer to the number of people working on it was, we have a core team of about 5 people, but there were about probably only 2 or 3 people working on the research side of it, but working very intensively. What was the first question again? Sorry, I didn't quite catch it.
The first question, I think, was on if you're doing remote interviews, how do you show the location in a film? If I understood that correctly, Eunice.
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, how do you introduce the talent and locate them? Yeah, that's a very good. Well, again, I mean, look, in the case of the academic the Chinese academic that we interviewed, we happened to have some file vision from an old ABC program that we used, but with the people that we commandeered, I guess, we just asked them to do some of their own filming around their location to establish where they were. I mean, it was you know, and Tim, who I spoke about, did a lot of, like, he was just awesome. He had a selfie stick and his phone, and he just went wandering around the city and, you know, did basically moving video diaries. So he pretty much located himself. So that personally, I think that works the best, if people will kind of introduce themselves and say, here I am, you know, stuck in Wuhan or whatever it is. That kind of solves the problem very neatly.
Yeah, I guess the question was in a way about the B-roll on an interview.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Sometimes I guess you won't have one, and it's still worth getting the interview, even if you don't have, if you don't have very good background.
Yeah, and if you're building them up as a character, it's important to have a bit of that. You don't just want them popping up as a talking head necessarily in a film. And on the last question, I would defer to my much smarter co-panelists on that, I think. I would hazard a guess to say that you might be able to do some of that reverse image searching. Again, you could do the verification on the locations, the individuals involved in the footage. You might want to try and identify them, and in doing so, try to get in touch with them to verify that what is being presented as a violent event actually happened that way. I don't know. There are probably better ideas than that.
Do either of the two of you want to jump in there on verifying violent incidents? Other methods one can use? The question from Germany, woman in Germany.
You want to go at it, Charlotte?
I was just going to say the same thing. You would verify it the same way you would other open source content. So you had the geolocation, the chronolocation. I think potentially the biggest part with violent content is the corroboration. So can we see what led up to this event? And can we see the aftermath of the event? Can we find videos that don't just show this one angle? Can we find videos showing the actual shot instead of just what usually happened, which is the person injured afterwards? So yeah, I think the biggest challenge is getting the most amount of content around a violent incident, specifically because it's something you really want to be sure about before you make any kind of claim.
Yeah, and to add on that, I was just, last October, I was verifying, there was this really important video and it was really graphic. So there's definitely a component of ethics and resiliency in this. If you're watching a violent video over and over and over, trying to like set out the visual cues so that you can match them to Google Street View, it can get a little too much too fast. And there's techniques for that. Like I like putting post-its on like to cover the blood or like to cover certain really gruesome things and that I can still see the rest. Or sometimes I will just take a screenshot of the thing that I need to stand out visually. But that's definitely the hardest for me is the emotional kind of like psychological PTSD that I can get from verifying violent content.
Good point to make. Thanks for that. Eunice, some more questions, please?
Yes, there's one question for Charlotte. Can TweetDeck be filtered to just show tweets with images or video clips? And can you share?
That was quick.
Can you share more about your work process? Do you find a story and then research it with OSINT, or do you search first and find a strand through that? Can you give examples? And one more, when citizens are posting content that could be damaging to repressive governments, what steps should journalists be taking to protect their sources in open source investigations?
Yeah, okay, so I'll start with the first question. I might defer to Sean a bit on the last one, because I tend to work, as most of our Bellingcat research is open source. We don't really interact that much with witnesses on the ground personally or directly. Yeah, but anyway, I'll talk first about the TweetDeck thing. So let me share my screen again. Okay. Craig and everyone else can breathe a sigh of relief. It is plugged in. It's not going anywhere. All right, everybody can see it, yeah? Great. Okay, so yes, I believe the question was about if you can filter your tweets just to show tweets with images or videos. Yes, you can. You do need to have a search term. So It doesn't have to be a word. It could be a location. But the way to do it is you click on your filter button, you go to tweet content, and then from here, instead of showing all tweets, you can say instead, okay, I want tweets that only have images, I want tweets that only have videos. If you're only interested in those two things, I would recommend just having 2 columns with identical search terms and having one with images and one with videos. Or if you want to have them all in one column, your only option is to hit tweets with any media. And then you might also get some, you know, in this case, or I did it right here. You'll see that I get pictures. Sometimes I get links to Periscope videos, but mostly it's pictures and videos. So hopefully that answers that question. Again, you do need a search term, but you can filter it that way. Could you repeat the second question one more time? Oh, I remembered it. Okay, so yeah, about if I already have a topic and then I look for open source, or if I go the other way around. So it really depends on the investigation. There are some investigations. For instance, we did a coronavirus disinformation debunking a few weeks ago, and that fell into our laps because my coworker received a WhatsApp video that turned out to be fake news, and we went off of that, and it happened really naturally. But then sometimes there is an idea and we decide, okay, can we look into any open source verification with this? You know, for instance, like if a protest or a riot or a violent event happens, okay, is there any open source content that we can use to investigate this further, etc. So I would say most of the time, if an event happens, it'll trigger us looking into open source content related to that. But then otherwise, it's usually the other way around. So there's a topic that comes to mind, and then how can we use open source in order to investigate another side of this or show a different side? And then for the last part, I want to preface by saying that I'm not a digital security expert at all, and nor do I really work with people who are on the ground in a direct way. So of course I use tweets and YouTube videos from citizen journalists who are capturing these events as they occur, but I operate from a very standoff perspective. I don't interact with them at all, both for their safety and mine. And that's just a choice that we've made within the organization. But I think Sean could speak more to that as well, or Gisela.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I look, obviously, if you're one thing to consider always, if you're proposing to broadcast or publish a vision or a photograph that has come from somebody on the ground, I mean, it's imperative to protect them. So you obviously you don't want to do anything that risks identifying them if they don't want to be identified. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but it's important to remember, and so easy to make a mistake on, I think. But in terms of, you know, communication, I mean, it's all about, I think, I'm not a digital security expert either, but I think it's all about encryption, really. I mean, you know, anything from as simple as proton mail, you know, encrypted email, which is incredibly easy to use, to, you know, to using Signal or Telegram to talk to them, you know, get them to use a VPN, which is pretty easy to set up. There's lots of free tools on the web to encrypt your communications, and more complicated, you know, PGP obviously takes a lot more to set up. But, you know, I think encryption is the basic to protect people that you're communicating with who may be in danger as a result.
Yeah, and
Yes.
if I could add to that, I've been recently doing a lot of research on, I mean, my tweet deck is a little insane right now, on how drug cartels are acting around COVID, right? Like what's going on with drug cartels in Latin America given COVID. And I have like 4 burner phones. I would not want
Do you want to explain what those are in case people don't know what they are? Sorry.
Yes, of course. Thanks, Anne. So I just get really cheap phones from Amazon, like really cheap used phones that I use when I'm on the ground. And I would leave, like, our phones are geolocation devices. So if I go to Mexico to report on drug cartels, I would leave my phone here in the United States, get there, buy a SIM card with a local number, and then put that in and just operate with that. Of course, it has disadvantages, but given the situation in Mexico and given the espionage capacity of the Mexican government, or the narcos, like, I really don't want to risk myself and my family, because that's kind of like a risk that you could take. So even in a non-Mexico environment, burner phones are fun, like it's not like committing any crime. I have like 5 here, and when I get close to what I think could be a dangerous source or someone on the ground, I'd rather use a number that would not directly link with my offline address. That's the thing. Like, you want to unlink the physical from the digital as much as you can.
Good tip. Thank you. Eunice, some more
Yes.
questions, please. Thanks.
Back to Gisela. Someone asked, does whoposted.what.com work only on Facebook? And there were a couple of people who asked Gisela to talk a bit more about hunch.ly. And there's another question from Malini. If you find a possible witness on Facebook and their profile is not public, how are you able to reach out to this person? How can we find their email address? And someone else said that people find tor.dk was useful before, but it is not working now. Is there any alternative for it? And if I may squeeze in one last one, none of the speakers have talked about WhatsApp or Telegram. Is it a black box? Can we do anything about that?
Yeah. Wow. Those are all really good questions. Yes. Who Posted What works only on Facebook. But there's other tools in the Bellingcat toolkit that could work for other things. I mostly really use TweetDeck and Facebook. I will sometimes go to Snapchat or TikTok, but it's platforms that tend to be a little bit more closed, so you don't get as much material. Yes, WhatsApp is really challenging for both researchers and regulators of misinformation because it's closed. It's just private. You can't get, it's like a silo, right? Like, you can't get in unless you're invited to a certain group, which is where information kind of goes around. Telegram is a little bit easier. I know a friend of mine, Anjali, was doing research on like the sell and buying of arms on Telegram, because there's open channels that you can join. And I say this with caution, like, you don't want to join this, like, right-wing channels with your phone number. Like, just get a burner phone and, like, kind of go around it, because you could expose yourself so easily with that. If they're not public, and this links to a question that someone asked about ethics as I was going through this, and I want to talk about that a little bit. Yes, this has been a question. So Alexa Koenig, who just published Digital Witness, who's my boss at the Human Rights Center, she has been thinking about ethics a lot and how to do this ethically. I can say from a journalism perspective, I could get in a lot of trouble if I don't disclose that I'm a journalist and I'm just hanging around in the back in a private group. It could be considered trespassing, kind of like the same as jumping a fence and recording inside of a private home, right? So I would usually use it to monitor and get a lead. And then, yes, I will use my account rather than a burner Facebook. Like, burner Facebook, I use it to just monitor everything. But then if I find a lead, I will log into my Facebook, reach out and say, hi, I'm a journalist. I would like to talk to you. I saw that you posted this. Can you give me an interview? And then it's up to your source if they say yes or no. But I think it's not, I use a burner account mostly because I'm not paranoid, but I'm just really wary and careful about my data and my privacy. And I don't want Facebook feeding me content based on what I search, because I'm researching ISIS. I don't want my Gisela account to be linked to that. But if I found someone that I want to reach out to, I will probably use my own identity as a journalist to reach out. And Twitter works really well for that as well. If it's not public, you have to reach out and tell them, like, hey, like, I found you on Facebook. I really want to talk to you. I'm working on this story. So basically just regular journalism. I know that People has been down for a while. I don't know if Charlotte has anything to say about that. The People, I've tried using it as well. I think they went into like a paying mode. But we can check that for you. It hasn't been working for the past month for me, and it used to work.
I think they were talking about People Find Thor, the Facebook searching thing, which is different. Yeah, People, the person searching application, you now do have to pay for it. You can get a free trial for a bit. That worked for me. But for People Find Thor, yeah, I think as of August last year, a lot of what was known as graph searching capabilities on Facebook were just taken out, and have no plans of returning, which is good for us as private citizens. They're, much more privacy focused now that Mark Zuckerberg kind of went in front of Congress and made that speech of his. So yeah, it's probably not coming back, and I don't have a good alternative for you, unfortunately. There's still, as Gisela pointed out, a lot of really interesting things you can do with Facebook. It's just not as stalkerish and creepy as it used to be.
Yeah, and for good and bad, right? Like, it's this tension between free expression and privacy that we're grappling with as a society post-Cambridge Analytica. This backlash that Charlotte was talking about, it was after Charlottesville. So yeah. And then the last one, yes, on Hunchley. I'll share my screen again really quickly. So Hunchley, I don't have it activated right now, but Hunchley is essentially hunch.ly. You can try it free, and the fun thing is that it will essentially look like this, like here to the right. It essentially will save all the links that you go through, and then it can even analyze it. It can even analyze all your links together and find patterns on your links. It's been used by Bellingcat. We used it a lot too with, I love this, never screenshot again. But it's essentially that, it's gonna look like this, and then you're gonna have all the links that you visited right here, and a big case. So you name your case, you start your case, and it'll just save all the links that you visit and then give you the capacity to analyze the links in bulk. Happy to talk more about that. Hit me up either on Twitter or Anne has my contact information. But yeah, that's Hunchley very, very quickly. Just play with it. Just play with stuff. It's fun.
Get a free whatever.
A free trial,
trial. Get a free trial. Yeah, we could talk a lot longer about that, but thanks for pointing that out. Eunice, a few more questions perhaps.
Yes.
Thank you.
Do you guys have any favorite examples of recent investigations on COVID-19 that use user-generated content? If you can explain what makes it an outstanding example and what other journalists can learn from it, that would be good. Or talk about the biggest mistakes journalists can make when they start applying OSINT techniques to find user-generated content for the first time. Someone, Andrei Zakharov, is asking, what tools do you use to search YouTube? And lastly, could you each list your favorite 3 free-to-use open source data gathering tools for developing countries?
Okay, thank you. There's 4 questions there, and not much time. So I think that might be the last set of questions. I'm really sorry to people who are waiting to have questions answered and we haven't come to them, but we're running out of time. So what I propose is if we go around to all 3 of you and answer the questions you feel you're able to or want to of those 4. So do you want to just quickly recap them again, Eunice, so everyone's clear what they are? They're the mistakes people make using open source, how to search YouTube, the best free to use software, and best examples of COVID-19 investigations they've seen. Yeah, those 4 questions, and then we'll wrap at that point. So who would like to start?
I'll start and just pass the baton, I'm afraid. I'm sorry. I don't really have answers to any of them, to be honest with you. So.
Okay, that's okay. So you don't have a favorite COVID-19 investigation that you admire yet?
I haven't seen a lot done. I've seen a lot of good stuff in print, to be honest with you. Yeah, not using sort of UGC.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, hopefully this this webinar will help inspire some ideas for that. But
Yeah.
actually, there's not a huge amount of COVID-19 investigation altogether because it takes
No,
time, doesn't it?
That's
So,
right. Yeah.
okay. Thanks for that, Charlotte.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I could start with the first question about common mistakes people make in doing OSINT investigations. Okay. I think the two questions I get probably the most often, and that I think are the biggest mistakes at the same time. So, sorry. But one is, how can I automate this? I think there's a really, really big group of people out there, and it's not a wrong motivation, I completely understand, but who think that, you know, OSINT is just using technology, therefore I can have the computer do it for me, and I don't understand why I'm spending time learning how to do this. Maybe at some point in the next 10 years, that will be true. That would make our lives somewhat easier if we could just geolocate something by putting it into an algorithm. Unfortunately, right now, everything you see, all the incredible open source investigations coming out by the New York Times or BuzzFeed or Bellingcat or whatever, is done by hand mostly. It's manual. It's people spending hours and hours and hours of their time and nights just looking for one sign on one building in the middle of nowhere. And that gets, I think, lost in these investigations when they come out because they seem so flashy and easy. And then the second mistake is, again, I'm going to harp on the tools thing and the idea that, you know, there's just a magic tool I can download or just a few things I need, and that way I can be good at these investigations. This will lead me to this next question about free software as my favorite tools I use. I actually struggle with answering this question because I don't have a crazy tool for you. I think my favorite tools I use are TweetDeck and Hunchly for archiving and Who Posted What. But mostly I just use the sites themselves, the social media sites. Google is probably my favorite tool ever that I use in an open source investigation. Google has incredible capabilities that not enough researchers use. But yeah, so unfortunately I don't have a crazy thing for you there. My favorite way to search YouTube, was that also a question?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
yes.
And
All
you've
right, I'll
also
show you real quick.
as well. Someone asked about Instagram.
And Instagram. Okay. All right. I can do that really quick. So YouTube, I would just do a site search, actually. So what that means is that I would just go to Google. Okay. And I'm just going to do site youtube.com. And then I search for whatever I'm looking for. So in this case, if I'm interested in, I don't know, let's do something fun. TikTok dances. Okay. And now you'll notice that all
You
of the
haven't
links
shared
I
your
get,
you haven't shared your screen, I don't think yet.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Thanks.
There we go. So you can see up here, all I did was I typed site, and then I put the site that I'm interested in this case, YouTube. And then I put TikTok dances as my subject I'm interested in. And then I can scroll through here. The reason I like this better than YouTube is because by using this tools function on Google, I can filter by duration of the video. I can also filter by date. So this is something that's hard to do on YouTube itself. If you go to YouTube, it'll tell you, okay, in the last 24 hours, in the last 3 months, but it won't necessarily let you pick a specific date range. Like I want just these 4 sets of days where I know something happened. So in this case, I can, you know, let's say some TikTok dance went viral between these days. I can search for it there. And the reason I like using Google better is that even though Google does filter my searches based on my data and what I think it wants, YouTube does as well, and YouTube is a bit harder to subvert. So if I was doing this for research, I would obviously log out of my personal account on here to try to get as clean a slate as possible. But from what I've noticed, both with Facebook and YouTube, if I search on Google, I tend to get less targeted, quote unquote, results based on who I am and my data.
Yeah.
For Instagram, yeah, I would use Who Posted What. Just at the very bottom, they have this Instagram posts on a date tagged with a location. This is one of the coolest searches I've seen for Instagram. Instagram itself is pretty difficult to search, But using this, you just put an Instagram location URL. So for instance, like, I don't know, Amsterdam on Instagram, and then you can find posts that have been tagged in that location on a specific date. So yeah, that's the coolest tool I've seen for searching Instagram. And then lastly, my favorite investigations on COVID, I just want to shout out a couple that I've seen. There's been some great ones, but I think BuzzFeed, as always, does some really interesting, just in general, investigations. But these two in particular were interesting. This one, I think it just came out a couple of days ago, by Craig Silverman, looking into the rumors and hoaxes online and how that's actually affecting healthcare workers on the front lines. So a good combination here of both open source material and then also speaking to, you know, real people and sources. The New York Times visual investigations team, they're always producing really incredible open source investigations, and particularly each of the reporters on that team individually also do really wonderful stuff. This is an investigation that was looking at how coronavirus is affecting North Korea's trade and how it's doing potentially a better job than sanctions could do in terms of, you know, lowering the amount of exports they're able to produce. Yeah, I love these kinds of investigations. They did this with RUSI. RUSI did an investigation on North Korea trade, I think about a year ago. That's also fantastic. But I like this because it combines satellite imagery along with ship tracking data, both of which are worlds you can get lost in open source. So if you're at all interested, I would read this and then try to see for yourself if you can find these kinds of things on maritime tracking tools and satellite imagery. It's pretty cool. And then, of course, I kind of have to shout out the people I work for, but also because I really do like the stuff we do. In this case, this is an investigation done by Robert Evans, who's an incredible reporter we have that focuses mostly on the far right and extremist content online. And he recently did a couple investigations. This one has a nice video if you're tired of reading on your screen, but just about corona disinformation, the whole system, how it works, how people are able to hide it from big tech moderators like Twitter and Facebook and things like that. So they're both really interesting investigations, specifically on coronavirus. There's plenty more, but those are the first that came to mind.
Great, thank you very much for that. Gisela, your favorites?
Yeah, just very quickly on my favorites. I think one of the most creative ones I've seen is this one by Haley Willis. It was such a beautiful video, and I thought it was so original because we usually post this either for misinformation or for, you know, like war reporting. But Haley, who's a former Human Rights Center Lab student, did this amazing video of all the scenes that all the humanity has in common, right? And the script is so beautiful, and it's just like we're all afraid, and all the supermarkets are, there's a lot of lines, and the funerals, and I thought it was such an original, and streets are empty, and it's all user-generated content kind of put together with a narrative. And it's just really, really beautiful. I really recommend it. It's called Fear, Humor, Defiance, How the World is Reacting to Coronavirus. I think she got really creative, and that's the thing that I like the most. Just like experiment and play with this and take it from there and see how we can, you know, change journalism a little bit, or at least leverage while we're all stuck at home.
Good, okay. Are you all done there, Gisela? Nothing else to add? Okay, thanks very much. We could keep going on, but I think we're going to have to stop there. And I think it's been really very interesting. And thank you all. I want to thank, first of all, my colleagues at GIJN who've worked tirelessly with me on this. And to the audience, thanks a lot for joining. We'll be sending an email out afterwards with all the links and the information. So you can pick that up there. And you know, we also have more webinars planned, including one I want to plug for next week, an hour later than the one today, next Thursday, which is on actually how to assess the evidence in the coronavirus pandemic, how to look at all the mountains of numbers that are coming out, most of which are uncertain at best. So we're going to focus on that in a week from now. But finally, I'd like to thank the three guests, the speakers today, Sean, Charlotte, and Gisela, for their really very interesting and very useful contribution. And I hope to be able to invite them again in the future. Thanks so much. And to the audience, goodbye, and please join us again. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Anne, as well.
Thank you, Anne. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.